All right, folks, welcome to this special video edition of the Whitfield analysis. I am Sam Whitfield, broadcasting live or semi-live, depending on when you're listening to this, from NGC1 here in Southern Florida. And I am joined here tonight by Joshua Johnson, who is my co-founder, one of my co-founders of American Watchmen. And Josh and I have been talking about a lot of interesting topics tonight, and I figured I would invite him on the show to discuss a myriad of topics, including the alt-right, the election, and anything else that we encounter on the show that comes up that might be random. Who knows? Well, whenever we do the video podcast, I tend to notice that things always never stick to one topic. So anyway, it should be a pretty good, interesting show, and you'll have to see what happens. As far as my contact info goes, you can follow me as always on Twitter at SamW_NGC, hashtag WRadio Show. You can also follow American Watchmen at A_Watchmen. And you can visit my website at thesamwhitfield.com for links to American Watchmen and everything else you need for your Sam Whitfield obsessions and whatnot. Not that anyone is obsessed with me, I don't think, but who knows. I've had a couple of crazy stalkers in the past. With that being said, let me introduce you to my guest. Joshua Johnson, as I said before, is the co-founder of American Watchmen, and I consider him to be one of the best dressed conservatives out there, even outdoing me sometimes. And I know I'm a pretty sharp dresser. How to describe Josh? I'll let him describe himself, obviously, but kind of how I would describe Josh is he's a Buckley conservative, a true Buckley conservative, mixed with a dash of alt-right Gavin McInnes type mixed with Rush Limbaugh, I would say. And there you go. You have Joshua Johnson. He's very intellectual, and he and I have become really good friends since starting American Watchmen. So, Josh, welcome to the program.
Glad to be on. I'm glad to be introduced as one of the best dressed young conservatives in the movement. So that's something I can cross off my bucket list now. I've always wanted to be introduced to along those lines.
Yeah. You tend to have me to shave, and I'm a pretty sharp dressed man usually, but I don't know. Part of it is you have better weather for dressing up where you are than I do. During the summer, really, the best I can do is to wear a polo shirt and a clean pair of shorts, and really, other than that, there's not much else I can do. So.
Never underestimate the seersucker suit. Those will be pretty good down south, I'd imagine.
True. But anyway, Josh, why don't you tell the audience a bit about how you got started in politics, and just give a little background, and how would you kind of classify yourself within the conservative movement?
Well, I first got into politics in 2007, 2008 during the presidential election. I wasn't so active during the primary. I didn't really get involved until during the general election. Not because I was a huge McCain fan or anything, but because that's when I just started to pay attention. And part of what drove me to start paying attention is because I'd always been into history. But part of what I wanted to, what really fascinated me about history is, I loved studying military history and Winston Churchill and FDR and all these great statesmen. And I was interested in seeing, how these guys made the decisions, and they didn't just become leaders overnight. There was a process, and so that's what really got me interested in politics. And then the 2008 presidential election is when I first became really active in politics. I remember going around canvassing for John McCain, and when he finally lost the election, I'll admit it, I shed a few tears that night when he lost. It was a bit saddening to me. Maybe it was my youthful idealism dying away. It was the first election I participated in. Was involved in student government for a long time in high school and then in college. Right when I got out of high school, I started writing for Red Millennial, and I was with them until around Memorial Day of this year. And I'm gonna guess you've told your listeners about what happened to us there.
Yes, I've told the audience actually more than you tell most people in the interviews. I've made no bones about calling out Julia Porterfield and the crew over at Millennial, and this is the other reason why I wanted to bring Josh on. It's not, well, it kind of is personal, us getting shut out by Red Millennial. I don't want to dwell on the past, but it didn't affect only me. Josh was one of the individuals that got canned from Red Millennial too. And as I explained a couple episodes ago, look, I don't have a problem with the Never Trump movement per se. Well, I do in terms of ideas, but they have a right to exist. What they don't have a right to do is shut people who are Trump supporters down, even if they're reluctant supporters like I am, and kind of like Josh was too. That's the thing. None of us were Trump supporters from the beginning, but I think we've all kind of gotten to the point where at least you and I think the other members realize, maybe with the exception of Adam Hill, one of our other co-founders, that it's either Trump or bust at this point. But so yeah, this isn't just my thing that I have against Red Millennial. They kicked a whole bunch of us out. Now, Josh, just to give some perspective, you're 21 as well, right?
Yep, that is correct.
So you started your political career in 2008. I started my political career in 2007, 2008 as well. So you and I have both roughly been in politics for 10 years, almost at this point.
It's a bit of a shocker. It doesn't feel like it's been 10 years.
No, I know, right? It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but if you do the math, it actually has been. What about the conservative youth movement do you think has gone really well, and what do you think has gone terribly and we need to improve on? You have a different perspective on some of this than I do, but I think it's equally as important.
Do you mean in general over the course of my time in politics, or what I see going on in the conservative movement today?
Both. Like what have been the positives, and then how do you think it's kind of gone today? And
well, I'll put it this way. I think the conservative movements, when I first regard it as it relates to youth, I think we were doing a lot better when I first started in politics in 2007.
Yeah, I would agree.
2008 than it had been doing in the years after that, and it's improving again now. But I'll get on that a little bit later, because back then the party was much more unified than it is now, and I say that because not only were we all united by Bush, but it seemed like we were all we all corralled around McCain. And like I said, I wasn't really too involved in the primary. But from what I have seen, looking back, on it and studying it, it was not as divisive as, the things that followed in years after. And after that, after we began to have the first 4 years of the Obama regime, uh, the conservative movement began to really splinter, and I guess part of that was with the Tea Party. But the Tea Party was good. The fact that the movement, it's ironic really, because the thing that brought the movement down, the thing that sort of ended our unity, which was our big strong point when I first came into politics, I think, is also what has helped us improve, because we needed to go through that in order to sort of reform our message and get the conservatism we need for a post-Bush world. And we've been in that phase for a while now, and I think we're just now starting to finally come out of it. And what the phoenix that is rising from the ashes, so to speak, of the old conservatism, the new conservatism that's coming out is, I think, embodied by figures like Milo Yiannopoulos and Ben Shapiro and Gavin McInnes, and some of the other people you've talked about in your show. And what I mean specifically is, I think conservatism in the United States is sort of catching up to where conservatism in Europe has gone. And like I was telling you right before we began the program, conservatives in the United States, the conservative movement in the United States, is becoming more nationalist in its tone and adopting more of the things we've been hearing Nigel Farage and Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders and other Eurosceptic parties and politicians in Europe say, except, we're applying that ideology to American conservatism, and, we're opposing globalists in the form of Hillary Clinton, the open borders crowd, and feminazis and things like that, as opposed to the European Union, like Farage and company have had to deal with. And so I think that's the strength. That's the strength I see in the conservative movement today, as it relates to youth, especially because like Milo Yiannopoulos bringing in, for the first time in my entire political life, I have seen a lot of LGBT Americans come out of the closet as Republicans and as conservatives, as opposed to in the past. So I think we're really expanding the tent in that way, because they understand, that we have their best interest at heart when it comes to confronting radical Islam and things of that nature. And not only that, but younger millennial Americans who aren't necessarily members of that community are coming out and supporting us as well, because they don't see us as being, old white rich old white men anymore.
What I'm starting to see, and feel free to kind of either agree or disagree with me. Here's kind of what I saw, okay? And I'm going to try and simplify this timeline as best I can, but essentially, so you and I started the same year, 2007, 2008, roughly. Back when I started this podcast, social media wasn't anywhere near where it is today. Facebook was still just starting out. Twitter was still a brand new thing. And there weren't that many young people on social media that were politically active, that I knew of, at least. So when I started my political career, I assumed, and you have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, and I've talked about this before, I didn't do this because I was egotistical at all. I literally thought I was the only conservative millennial / teenager in the nation at that point. And I really didn't care. I figured that if I was, I would be the lone young conservative. That was kind of how I felt. And I imagine that, Josh, I don't know, but I mean, that might have been how you felt. I mean, when you started out, I don't know. But then what I really started to notice was the big boom for the conservative youth movement that I noticed really happened in 2010 during that primary election, where Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and all of the kind of, Tea Party conservatives got elected. And part of that, I've always credited Andrew Breitbart with kind of the rise of the internet conservative movement, because Breitbart was always very savvy with social media. And so he told everyone, get on Facebook, get on Twitter. And so kind of around the time I joined Facebook and Twitter, and when I kind of made my bones, I was part of kind of an up and coming class of millennial conservatives that kind of, and we all kind of started fighting each other. And that was how, I wouldn't really say I'm famous at all. I certainly haven't made any money on what I'm doing. But I would say that my presence really started to, that was kind of when my, rise to, prominence, I guess, really took place was in 2010, 2011 when that happened. Then what happened was in 2012, the conservative youth movement kind of died off because so many of us just got really disappointed with, the election results of that election, and a bunch of us quit. And those of us that did stay behind kind of took a break. And I mean, you were writing at Red Millennial, for far longer than I was. But it kind of, I wouldn't really say the conservative movement got fractured, but it got a lot smaller. And so now with the whole Trump movement, what seems very interesting to me is that the whole Trump movement and the kind of the millennials for Trump and the guys for Trump and the babes for Trump, what's interesting to me is all of the conservative youth members, such as myself and you, who were early kind of adapters, we were all political brainiacs to begin with, right? But the young conservatives who are kind of just joining now, I mean, they're not, I wouldn't really say that they're politically savvy like we are, but I think they're just, average college kids who have become interested in politics because they're so sick of political correctness, and they've kind of been forced into political activism just to, stop social justice. Would you say that's a good? Would you agree with me on that in my thesis, or would you disagree, or what would you say to that?
I think I would say that you're correct that a lot of the conservative youth movement faded away after the Tea Party, and we've sort of mentioned, you and I have discussed this before. Whenever a new ideology or a new faction is on the rise, it's going to be very out and loud and proud and very eccentric, and that's going to obviously turn a lot of more mainstream people off to begin with. But then it starts to normalize. That's what we saw with Barry Goldwater, not Gary Boldwater, as I almost said. Barry Goldwater, we saw that with him, and he came out and everybody thought he was nuts, and he lost the election in a landslide. And then about 2 cycles later, was it, Reagan came along and brought Goldwater's ideology in as the dominating force in the Republican Party. And you see that sort of with the Tea Party in 2010. Even though some people have liked to say that the focus was on fiscal issues, and that's what it certainly was born out of. There was concern over the national debt and the socialistic policies of Obama, growing the size and scope of government. But, it evolved very quickly over the course of the next couple of years into being a much more populist, nationalist kind of movement, and that leads us to where we are today, because Romney really wasn't a Tea Party candidate. Trump is the closest thing to the Tea Party candidate we've had. He's the anti-establishment kind of guy. And so I think the reason, a lot of those millennials left after the movements, after the Tea Party in 2010, is because they were scared off because it was eccentric. And now it's starting to be more refined. Obviously, Trump is still a little rough around the edges here and there, and that turns some people off. But he's slowly getting better. And even if he does lose, I think this could be, just like Barry Goldwater. I keep wanting to say Gary Goldwater. I'm not really sure why. Barry Goldwater, and then we'll see even more people, come back into the fold, or new people entirely, like you've said. And I think it's interesting that a lot of the people that are being drawn in by Trump and by Milo and Gavin and those kind of people are just college students. They're not politicos like you or I are, because it's normal college students that win elections, not people like us. We're the ones that win primaries. They're the ones that win general elections, and our role really is to reach them for the first time. Maybe they have a friend who's into politics and they listen to this podcast of yours, and they hear something they really agree with, so they share that on Facebook or whatever, and then their friend who'd never cared about politics before, for whatever reason, gets interested and listens to it. And really that's their introduction, or maybe that's what really gets them on fire. It's like, oh, that guy made a really good point. Or something to that effect.
Josh, I completely agree with you, and I certainly do think it's interesting. Now, one topic that you and I have both talked about specifically, and this is one topic that you and I mean, you and I talk every day via Facebook. Whether it be in the American Watchman management chat or privately. But one thing that you and I have both talked a lot is the alt-right. And you and I have both been proponents of the quote-unquote alt-right. And on September 1st, you published an article over at AmericanWatchman.org, our site that we both founded, about how the alt-right, it's titled, "Why the Alt-Right is Nothing New." And you seem to be a little bit more of an expert on the alt-right than I am. So would you mind explaining to the audience kind of what the alt-right is in your mind and why it's nothing new?
Well, I think to answer that question, it depends on how you, and I didn't really touch on the second part, when I referenced these European parties. I didn't really touch on that in the article. I was focusing more on the American aspect and, the historic, and from an American perspective, not looking at Europe. The alt-right is nothing new because it boils down to paleoconservatism, because almost everything that they talk about has been stuff that Pat Buchanan or Richard Nixon used to talk about. And it's like I titled the article, there's nothing really new about it. If you agree with Trump that NAFTA and the TPP and these other trade deals are hurting our country and that we need to take a more protectionist economic line, that's not a new idea. It's not something that Trump whipped up out of or even took from the Democrats' playbook. It's something he took from the paleoconservative playbook. And the real issue, I think, is it's like I said at the beginning of the sentence. It's kind of hard because it's two things really. You have the aspect of it that's paleoconservative, which says that we need to have a protectionist economic policy in order to protect American workers and American businesses. That says that we need to have a border because a country is nothing without its borders, because we need to have a common culture and a common tongue. And that says we need to have, and it rejects the neoconservatives because it says we need to have a realistic foreign policy. So it's not a dove, but it's not a hawk. It's, somewhere in between. It's like Henry Kissinger's foreign policy. And I keep making these references to the Nixon administration because Pat Buchanan was the foremost paleoconservative in recent memory. And he was one of Nixon's top advisors when he was president. Whether or not you consider Nixon a paleoconservative is a discussion for another day, but it's certain that there are a lot of paleoconservative ideas in his administration, along with some more moderate ones. But again, discussion for another day. So that's the American aspect of it, where you look at it historically as paleoconservatism. When you look at the future aspect of it, or history repeating itself, the European aspect, whatever you want to call it, the alt-right is basically what we have seen parties, right-wing parties that have been on the up and up in Europe for the last several years saying over and over again. And a lot of these parties were first formed in the 1990s. And just like the alt-right is today, when you had parties like the Front National in France, founded by Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, when they were first founded, you had all these cranks come out, and these people who sometimes weren't too pleasant of characters, and they were the first wave. Like I said earlier, the people who kind of turned people off. And then, as time goes by, it becomes more refined. So now in France, you have Marine Le Pen, and you have Nigel Farage, and you have Geert Wilders. And in Wilders' case, unfortunately, the out and proud mentor of his actually wound up getting killed by Islamic terrorists, which really is what motivated him to, dedicate his life to the cause of fighting against Islam. Or, H.C. Straka, and now Straka is the leader of the FPO, the Austrian Freedom Party in Austria. Everybody's heard about them recently because Norbert Hofer, the Trump of Austria, is set to become their president here in October, which is another discussion for something we might get to later on in the program. The October's prize this year might be from the alt-right, so to speak, when Norbert Hofer wins the presidency of Austria and marks the first, right-wing party in Europe winning an election for head of state or head of government over there. But that's the European aspect of it. And so what my point is when I say it's nothing new is when you hear the words alt-right or Hillary talking, they talk like some new ideology has been formed, or like some completely, like Trump and Milo and this dark cable of trolls met somewhere on the internet and decided to form this ideology behind Pepe the Frog or some nonsense like that. And that's really nothing at all what the alt-right has preached. Obviously the trolls have preached some stuff that's pretty far out there, but like you said, Sam, if all of these people were a bunch of racists and skinhead Nazis, where are they on the streets? These are just a bunch of kids that have nothing better to do, that are hiding behind an avatar online and acting like trolls, while the actual alt-rightists who are interested in governing and spreading the ideology, like Milo Yiannopoulos and Gavin McInnes, and I would argue even to an extent Ben Shapiro, because he takes a very, facts don't care about your feelings kind of attitude, as he says.
Yeah, the one thing I've said about Shapiro is that Ben Shapiro is actually so alt-right, he doesn't even realize that he's alt-right. He's like, he's so alt-right that he transcends alt-rightism, if that makes sense.
I would say that makes sense to a degree, yeah.
Yeah, and look, I mean, basically what I do is I wouldn't say it's just online, but the other thing too is a lot of the real alt-righters who publish online, like you and I, we use our actual names and our actual faces too. Most of the trolly Nazi members of the alt-right, they hide behind avatars and whatnot. And like I said in my article, which you hyperlinked to, which I appreciate, there seems to be this kind of falsehood going around that the alt-right is a whole bunch of neo-Nazi racist skinheads. And as I've said before in this program, and as you and I have talked about, like, I've run into those assholes on Twitter before. They're not fun to deal with, but they don't represent the alt-right in its entirety. Not at all. I think that the Milo, did you ever read his article on what the alt-right is? Did you read that piece that he wrote? Like,
The Establishment Conservatives Guide to the Alt-Right. I did read it.
yeah.
It wasn't too serious of a piece. I think he maybe could have done better, and he but here's my issue with it. One, he dedicated an entire section of that just to the trolls, and I would say those trolls are not members of the alt-right at all, because they predate the alt-right too. I mean, you could have gone onto the internet way before 2016 or 2015 and found these far-right skinhead people hiding behind a screen on the internet saying vile and vulgar things to other people. I mean, that's
Right.
that didn't really need to be mentioned, and I wouldn't consider them part of the alt-right at all.
Well, and if you actually read the article, at least the way I read it, he actually does kind of say that. And what he says too is that the alt-right is that portion of the alt-right, or the 1488ers as he calls them. The 1488ers are what the Never Trump movement and Never Trump publications like Red State and Red Millennial would like you to believe that the alt-right is made up of entirely.
And
But
that's
but that's not the case. And that is the one section of Milo's article that I think everyone needs to read, because it's true. Everyone who has never Trump would like to point to the neo-Nazi skinheads, and they've tried to do this and say, "Aha, the entire alt-right is racist," and yet you're Jewish.
I
I'm,
am.
yeah. Wait, are you asking me, or are you saying that?
No, I'm just saying, yes, yeah, that is correct. I'm Jewish, yeah.
Yeah, you're Jewish. I'm handicapped, physically. You know, we have, and then we have a whole bunch of other people on our staff. So as far as neo Nazis go, you and I alone we would both make terrible skinheads, because you're Jewish and I'm handicapped.
Well,
So
here's what the issue with including and here, let me put it from the left's perspective, or as I like to imagine they see it. So conservative nationalism, or sometimes referred to as national conservatism, you can go and you can look this up. This is a mainstream form of conservatism. Some would argue it's just another name for paleoconservatism, because it emphasizes almost all of the same issues except for the protectionist economic policies. And because national conservatives or conservative nationalists can differ on their economics. Some conservative nationalists, like the people over at UKIP, are much more libertarian, while other conservative nationalists, like the people in Marine Le Pen's Front National in France, are very protectionist. But when you look at national conservatives or conservative nationalists, I prefer to say conservative nationalists myself, because it emphasizes that nationalism is a major part of the ideology. When you look at them, they are not Nazis or racists or skinheads, or there are quite a few Jews that are members of these groups. Obviously I'm one, and so when the left says, "Whoa, well, the alt-right," which is essentially conservative nationalist, they're like, "Oh, well, the alt-right is all these neo-Nazi trolls online that are harassing everyone and being vile scumbags." They cling to that because that's their way of trying to put down the rising new ideology, if that makes any sense. That's their way of extinguishing the fire before the fire that's burning underneath their ivory tower, so to speak.
oh yeah, totally. And I'll let you continue in just a sec, but I just remembered something too. The one thing that baffles me about why the Never Trump movement is falling for this is exactly the same kind of thing that the left was saying about the Tea Party too. that the Tea Party was racist, and I've actually confronted a couple people who write over at Red State about this, and who have been Never Trump over at National Review, and I've said, well, isn't this the same thing about how they used to call the Tea Party racist? And they're like, yeah, but that was different. And I'm like, okay, can you tell me how it was different? Well, and then they go through this whole kind of technical thing, but they never give me an actual answer. And it's like, so it's not any different. And they're like, well, okay, not really.
The thing is, the left is so eager to brand anyone who is a conservative of any ideological stripe. Doesn't matter what kind of conservative you are, libertarian, Christian, whatever faction of the movement you belong to, they'll label you a racist. And the dangerous thing about that is, let's say that an actual racist politician does, God forbid, come along and for some unholy reason becomes popular. And the left is shouting racist, 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 and nobody believes them because they have shouted that word so often that it doesn't mean anything anymore. You see them; they've done the same thing with the word fascism. If an actual fascist were to come along and run for president of the United States, nobody would care because that word has been thrown around so often that it is meaningless now. They've taken the meaning out of the word racist and fascist by accusing everyone they disagree with of being those things.
Right. Well, and as Dinesh D'Souza points out in a lot of his material, and I haven't seen his new movie yet, but I've watched a lot of the interviews that he did. I watched the one recently that he did with Steven Crowder. He actually pointed out, and he's absolutely right, by the way, that the Democrats love to try and find, any hint of racism within the conservative and libertarian movement. Yet, it's the Democrat Party that literally was the party of slavery, and literally was the party of, Jim Crow. Even to this day, I mean, Hillary, people have said people have leaked this, that Hillary never really liked Obama, and she once said about Obama, 50 years ago he would have been getting us coffee or something. So I mean, for them to call us racist without looking at their own party, it's laughable, to be quite honest. So
Hillary based much of it's a bit of a twisted irony, really. I grew up in a Republican family, and we're all good, solid Republicans in the House of Johnson. And in 2000, I was saying I got into politics 2007, 2008, but I didn't really pay attention to the Republican primary. I didn't really get involved until McCain was the nominee. But I do remember I took an active interest for whatever reason. Maybe it might have just been because we went to visit my mom's. We were in Iowa. We were visiting her side of the family, and her brother is a diehard Democrat. And so we were sitting at his house, and he was watching the news, and we're watching the Hillary Clinton poll campaign or whatever. And I was watching, and every time she was on talking about Obama, and no, she wasn't even using the dog whistle language that the left likes to accuse the right of using. She was blatantly out and out racist against him in a lot of her speeches, or at least I got a very strong racist vibe whenever I saw her talking about him. And maybe that was just because, that was the first time he was the very first African-American president, and maybe I was buying into the hype a little as a young kid, thinking, oh, well, Hillary doesn't like him because he's racist or something like that. But I just got a very strong racist vibe from her during that campaign, and I didn't get that from McCain either, I should point out, during the general. I campaigned strongly for him, but when I was watching her, I felt there was this racism beneath.
Right. Well, I actually remember feeling the same way. I mean, you and I were both in 7th, 8th grade when that happened. I remember the same thing. I also remember uh, Jesse Jackson, um, or maybe it was Al Sharpton. It was one of the two, saying something like, and this is an actual quote. Uh, I think like Al Sharpton was was mic'd up, but he didn't realize that he was mic'd up, and he said something like, "Well, that Barack Obama, he's not a real nigger. I am," or something like that. So it's funny because the kind of the elite, you know, at that time, even the blacks, they didn't really like Obama either, in the Democrat Party, and that just I actually remember feeling bad for Obama at that point too. I'm like, uh, you know, I'm like, granted, I know that he's not perfect, and I like McCain, but why doesn't his own party want him to be the first successful African American president? It really kind of seems backwards. Um,
Well, you'll remember too that even after Obama was president, you had white Democrats being racist against him. I remember, I believe Rush Limbaugh made a point of Harry Reid referring to Obama as the magical the term. I don't even if it's a quote, I don't really want to use it.
it,
The Spanish word for black. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before too, you can curse on my show, but yeah, no, and that was actually Al Sharpton that had said that, too. It was Al Sharpton, a black pastor, who had said that Obama's, a magic, you know what. So
Well, that also sparks bigger. And this might be getting a bit off the topic in Black Lives Matter, but you see, when Al Sharpton or when Jesse Jackson used the N word, it's normal because I'm black, so I have the black privilege of saying the N word whenever I like, even though it's still demeaning to other black people. Even if I think I'm a gangster and I think it's cool to say that, but. They did a study on this, and I think I saw Paul Joseph Watson had posted a video I watched about this. And this fellow was sitting on this program, and he was saying that during and after World War II, there were not during World War II, obviously, but after World War II, there were quite a few American GIs who were African American, who had children with German women, or they met a German woman and they got married and had kids. Some of them took their new immigrant wives and came back to America with these kids, and some of the other ones stood in Germany and helped rebuild after the war in West Germany. And the thing was that the black youth from these marriages that grew up in America grew up suffering a lot of the social problems that the Black Lives Matter likes to complain about and pretend is the result of institutional racism, when in reality it is a cultural issue, because they grew up in this culture that glorifies criminal behavior and gangster rap and all those things. And so they grew up and they were growing up with social problems and they weren't maturing correctly. Whereas these African American, well, they weren't African American, they were these African German, I guess you could call them, children. In Germany, because there is no black subculture, there is no African American, well, not African American, there's no African German subculture in Germany's inner cities. Because that's not there, there's no rap, wasn't anything like that. The children of these black GIs and their German wives did not have the social issues growing up in Germany that the ones in America did, because they didn't have that black subculture there.
yeah, yeah, you're talking about the Ameropeans, as I like to call them, half American, half European, right?
I believe so. This is just something I saw in a video of Paul Joseph Watson's. It was I wish I knew the guy's name. He's a wonderful African-American conservative who's got his own program, kind of like William F. Buckley's firing line, or at least he did in the 90s. Maybe he's deceased now, I don't know. His name escapes me right now. I'll have to tweet the video out after this, and I'll let you all know my Twitter at the conclusion of the program. That way you guys can check that out.
Speaking of William F. Buckley Jr., I know that you say in your Twitter bio that you are a Buckley conservative and that you identify closely as a Buckley conservative, which I identify as a Buckley conservative too in many respects. With that being said, what do you think of the Never Trump movement, specifically how they've somehow taken William F. Buckley Jr.'s good name to mean Never Trump? What do you think of the Never Trump movement as a whole?
To answer I'll answer those questions in reverse. I'll answer my opinion on the Never Trump movement as a whole first. I think there are two or three. Let's go with two. I think there are two different kinds of Never Trumpers. There are the people who have issues with him, and rightfully so, because he has said some pretty heinous things, like about women and things like that, and they just have issues with his character, or because they have issues with him on policy. I know a lot of people have issues with his trade policy, for example, like Ben Shapiro, but even Ben Shapiro's coming around. He's been saying on his program lately, I've noticed, that he might end up voting for Donald on November 4th anyway. But so you have those people who have legitimate concerns about him, but they are slowly but surely accepting him as they go through the stages of grief, and that's what I think we're seeing right now with National Review sort of seemingly doing a 180 in terms of their content over the last 48 hours. And that's the first kind of Never Trumper. The second kind of Never Trumper, which I would lob Julia Porterfield and Kyle Foley into, are the kind that grew up in or became very involved in and sort of sealed themselves off from the rest of the American body politic. Are these people that think they're the rightful heirs of the conservative movement, and that it's theirs to shape and control, and that anybody who comes and has a different opinion can just get out. And they're betraying Jeffersonian principles for their own desire for power over the party and the movement, because they're afraid of Trump and what his faction represents now. And I wouldn't, it's a bit of a stretch to even call it his faction again, because it predates him, the ideas anyway. He's just the guy who sort of showed up and got lucky and wound up becoming the first, anti-establishment conservative nationalist candidate, nominee, I should say. And they're just dead set against him, and they're not interested in winning so much. I find it really ironic. I remember in summer 2015, and I don't mean to harp too bad on Julia here.
No, not at all.
But I'm largely over the whole deal with Red Millennial. I try to be friendly now and again on Twitter. Whether or not she wants to be friendly in return is entirely up to her. It's civil conversation is a two-way street, as they say. Yes. But the thing is, she said in summer 2015, when we did a Red Millennial roundtable discussion on Ted Cruz's candidacy when he first launched, that she said something to the effect of, "I just really want to win, you guys." And it's become apparent that she if she was so interested in winning and governing, then she would, and not just her, the other Never Trumpers in the second category as well, would have fallen in line behind the nominee, or at least gone through the 5 stages of grief like the first group of Never Trumpers, whom I trust will get through to acceptance before Election Day. They would have done that, but instead she's doubled down and insisted that the conservatism is ours and it can't be changed, and there's there's no need for innovation, there's no need for a new conservatism for a 21st century. None of that. We don't need that. Is what they're essentially saying. We need to have, Ronald Reagan conservatism all the way. And Ronald Reagan was a great guy, but like I said in that very same roundtable on Ted Cruz, we don't need Ronald Reagan 2.0. We need to find something that appeals to the unique problems and challenges facing our country today. And so that's what I think of the Never Trump movement. There are two kinds. The first group isn't so bad, and they're gradually coming around. And they're the ones that I think are saying things like, that article you shared earlier today, don't purge Sean Hannity and the rest. Then there's the second group that have gone completely totalitarian and are a little better than the people on the left. As to what I think, what was the first half of your question again? Sorry about that, I got lost.
The first question is, you mentioned in your Twitter bio that you identify as a Buckley conservative, yet the Never Trump movement has kind of, tried to make William F. Buckley their mascot for whatever reason. I don't know. But as a quote-unquote Buckley conservative, what do you think makes you a Buckley conservative? And do you think the Never Trump movement is accurate to use his name, or do you think that they're, misrepresenting his character, or what do you think?
I think that the Never Trump movement has, to use a bit of, I went to college for legal administration, so to use a bit of a legal term, I would say that they have enough evidence. That there is some circumstantial evidence that would suggest that they are right to use William F. Buckley's name, and I say that because he wrote a piece, I can't remember the title of it, where he said regarding, they asked him, well, hey, what if Trump decides to run for mayor of New York or something, or mayor, or maybe even president at the time? And Buckley wrote, well, look for the narcissist. And he never singled Trump out by name, but there is enough evidence, that you could at least, there seems to be an implication that it was Trump, if that makes sense, that he was talking about. So I think they're right to use his name. In regards to, and this is the important part, they're right to use his name in regards to the personal character defects they see with Donald Trump. When it comes to politics, though, I don't think they are correct to use Trump's name, because Trump has said, while he's certainly differed with Buckley on issues of trade, the rest of what he stood up for is pretty much in line with what Buckley would have wanted. And you also have to remember, they have sort of, in the same way that they have made Ronald Reagan out to be somebody who was the perfect conservative, who never did anything wrong, even though he issued an amnesty that many of them will be all but too glad to forget to mention, unless it suits their own purposes. Buckley himself stumped for people that a lot of the Never Trump conservatives would say aren't conservative at all. I know that in '64, not '64, that would have been Goldwater. In '68, Buckley was not only strongly campaigning with Richard Nixon, he was actively advising Richard Nixon during the '68 campaign. And a lot of conservatives in the Never Trump movement would say, well, Nixon's not a real conservative. He's not an orthodox one. Well, Buckley backed him because he was the Republican nominee. I think if Buckley were alive today, we would see the same thing happen. He would call out, like I said, Donald Trump on his character defects, the narcissism, which there is evidence that he did call him out, even if not by name, for. But that he would ultimately come around to back him as the nominee, especially against somebody like Hillary Clinton. As for my own, what makes me think I'm a Buckley conservative, why I identify as that, and I would like to correct you, it's not in my Twitter bio, it's on my staff biography on American Watchman and the Federalist Papers. My Twitter bio, I think, just refers to my positions at American Watchman, Federalist Papers, and being the host of my own podcast, Johnson's World. But the reason I would identify with him would probably be because when it comes to social issues, I would identify as a cultural libertarian. Buckley himself most certainly was like this in certain areas. Obviously, he wasn't out and saying that we should get government out of marriage, like we say today. But the culture of the country wasn't there at that time. But he did come out and say very early on, and many conservatives balked at him for saying this, that he was in favor of drug legalization. In particular, he was in favor of marijuana legalization, just as I would say I am, because these are personal issues. This is a personal responsibility issue. So that's part of why I identify as Buckley conservative, because of my cultural libertarianism, but also because cultural libertarianism is great, but if you have no moral fiber or no moral compass behind it, you're going to quickly devolve into libertinism. And Buckley had that moral compass. He was a man of great faith. My faith plays a very important role in my life and in my politics as well. And going a little bit away from the social issues, he was very fiscally conservative, believing in the free market and capitalism. And this is what I think is interesting about the so-called alt-right. I would not say that they really talk about social issues. I would never call nationalism sort of transcends social issues. It covers foreign policy, it covers immigration, and it covers law and order, economics. So I would say it transcends that. I'm not really sure where I would describe myself and Buckley's nationalistic views on immigration or law and order or anything like that. I'm not sure if I would say it's a social issue or an economic issue. I would say probably just a domestic issue in that regard. So that would be why I identify as a Buckley conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think the more that I think about it, I'm probably a Buckley conservative too. And that's just why it's so odd to me that people think that he would be a never Trump person. And I think it's ridiculous too, because to say that he would or wouldn't be a never Trump person, because look, he's dead. So honestly, no one could say for certain what he would or wouldn't be. And I just think it's ridiculous. And people have done the same thing with Andrew Breitbart. They're both gone. And to project that, they would have supported Trump or they would not have supported Trump, you're just projecting at that point, and it's ridiculous.
Well, in regards to Andrew Breitbart, too, it's said that a company decades, and you can see this perfectly with Walt Disney and Disney, or with, I forget his name, but the fellow who founded, I think his name might have actually been J.C. Penney. Maybe, I don't know, the guy who founded J.C. Penney.
Yeah, his name actually was J.C. Penney.
So in his case and Disney's case, and it's often been said that, when an entrepreneur founds a company, even for many years after they're dead, the kind of culture and the kind of spirit they embody is found within their company, even after they've been dead for a long time. So when I hear people say, Andrew Breitbart would be rolling in his grave if he only saw what had become of Breitbart today, I don't think that's the case, because that was, his mark is still in that company, whether you want to admit it or not. The culture that he embodied and the spirit that he embodied are still in that company's culture, whether you want to admit it or not. And it would seem to me anyway, when Andrew Breitbart was alive, I knew about him, but I didn't know about Breitbart so much, the website. It didn't really seem to take off until after he was dead. And, maybe that had to do, maybe it was a bit of a martyrdom effect, so to speak. There are some people who suggested that he might have been offed by the liberals. I don't know if there's any truth to that or not. That might be a conspiracy theory. It might not be. Who knows? But it took off and began to become the Breitbart we see today very soon after his death. And I don't think that would have been possible unless he had already set up a culture in which that could occur. So the idea that Andrew Breitbart would hate what Breitbart has become today is just complete and utter hogwash, I think.
I would largely have to agree with that. Now it's interesting. I actually have a question. So, did you say that you're libertarian in terms of the? So what issues would you say you're libertarian in on?
I'd like to clarify. That would be small L libertarian. I disagree very much with these diehard libertarians who, for example, even though I favor the legalization of recreational marijuana, I have said for a long time, and I didn't used to be in favor of it. That was only as the science began to come in, and it wasn't as evil as I thought it was. I used to say, and I still do say, a government sets the general moral standards of its time. A lot of libertarians, the big L, hardcore, diehard libertarians, disagree to me and say, "Oh, that's status nonsense. You know what you're talking about, Josh." But we now see that that's true because Gallup released a poll the other day I saw saying that more Americans think that marijuana is harmless and like cigarettes, and largely I wouldn't recommend people do it. I wouldn't recommend people do any drug. I wouldn't say smoke or smoke cigarettes or dope or whatever. Don't do it. That would be my recommendation to you all who are listening tonight. But the fact is that more people view it as harmless and not as bad as we made it out to be for years. And a major reason behind that is because now that it's becoming legal in so many states, people's moral perceptions of it are changing because the government does set the moral standard, the general moral standards of any society. And that's just a simple fact. And I remember all these diehard libertarians disagreed with me on that, but I do agree with them now though that it should be legal because it's a personal responsibility choice. I may disagree and I may think it's dumb to smoke pot. I may think you're doing a disservice to yourself, but ultimately that's what it boils down to. You're just doing a disservice to yourself, and it's none of my business if the guy across the street's going to ruin his life. That's personal responsibility. If he wants my help to improve his life, later on and get him into rehab or something, I'd be more than glad to help. So on an issue like that, issues like marriage, I think the government should just get out of it, quite frankly, and let it become a private religious or however you want to get married. If you're like me, if you're a person of faith, go and get married in your respective house of worship. If you're somebody who is more secular or atheist, even go to a courthouse and simply get a certificate of marriage, and those could be issued to anybody. I wrote an entire piece on this at Red Millennial. It's a shame it can't be referenced anymore because those pieces were all taken down. I think I have them in a private archive somewhere. I might resubmit that or do a special one day where I have that brought up on American Watchmen. That's I guess what issues would you like to know more on? When I say I'm a cultural libertarian, that is primarily in areas of policy. As a person, I'm much more social conservative myself, but I don't believe that I should use the government to force my views on others necessarily.
Right. No, I would say so. You're a cultural libertarian on much of the same issues I am. I would add one more topic to which I'm a cultural libertarian on, which never gets talked about anymore. And I'm quite honestly, I'm surprised, and I wish people would talk about it. And this is partially due because I'm in Florida, where this is a big problem. I am for the legalization of prostitution, federally speaking.
I would
Uh,
agree. I would agree with you on that. I just want to throw that out there.
morally, I that it's not something I would participate in. Uh, I don't. That's not something I think I would ever participate in. However, Florida in particular, um, and in fact, my opinion on this started to change because of an interview I had on my show about a year and a half 2 years ago now. I I've had a lot of great guests on my show, but I've also had a lot of really unexpected guests on my show covering topics that I never thought I would have. So, about a year and a half ago, I had this woman on my show who she's from Florida. She actually lives very close to where I am in Florida, and um, she runs a center. She runs an organization, a nonprofit, to help young girls who have been victims of sex trafficking here in the United States. Now, what most people don't realize is that you think of sex trafficking, you think of third world hellholes in Africa. But if you've ever seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, they make a big deal that that movie was in, movie was in, first world Europe. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of that is true. It also happens right here in the United States, and not a lot of people are aware of it. And in fact, Florida, unfortunately, is one of the highest uh, instances of child sex trafficking in the United States and overall illegal prostitution. So I was interviewing this woman. Her name is Jamie Walton. She runs the Wayne Foundation, and which if you want to go back and listen to the episode, I would highly recommend it. But at one point, she and I got to talking about legalized prostitution, and she brought up the point that legalized prostitution, sure, it's still prostitution, but it's a lot safer because it's federalized, and you're not going to be dealing with uh, people trying to traffic children, uh, use of pimps per se. It's going to be legalized, it's going to be regulated, and it's going to be safer. And like or not morally, I have read up on it, and legalized prostitution has worked in Vegas. And so kind of where I'm at now in terms of cultural libertarianism is, okay, we want to talk about legalizing drugs. That's all fine and dandy. But what about this topic? Because, illegal prostitution is almost as dangerous, if not more so dangerous, as drug addiction, and it is, as people say, the oldest profession in the world. So my whole
Well,
opinion, my whole opinion is legalize it, tax it, and regulate it.
well, not only that either, but you have to also consider legalized prostitution wouldn't only just reduce illegal sex trafficking, but it would make make work and life safer for those individuals that are working in the sex industry, or the I don't know what you want to call that, the
Yeah,
the sex performers or whatever. Because think about it for a moment. If you're a young prostitute, and right now, as things are, where the system is it's illegal, you have to go out, and usually you have to. The idea that somebody can just go and be an independent hooker is a bit silly, because they have to. Usually, the idea is that if they have a pimp, then they have a base of clients, and quote unquote clients. The people that he knows who's going to want to come and pay for them, their services, and or they get suckered into feeling like they need to be protected by the pimp, and the pimp turns out to be an abusive monster himself. Or the issue is they go, and because of the nature of their work right now as a prostitute, they have to go to their client's home or a hotel or something, and then once they're there, they could be, for all we know, the guy who hires them could be a monster who rapes them or beats them or something like that. And then because the profession is illegal, they don't want to go and say, "Oh, well, I got beat up because I was I was a hooker, and I was about to engage in an illegal activity." So they don't get any help, and then they run back to their pimp, and their pimp beats them up even more. So if you imagine, if you legalize it, then you would have legitimate businessmen, legitimate entrepreneurs opening up brothels like we see in Las Vegas, where instead of the women having to go out, the patrons would come to them, and they would be able to offer up their services in a safe and secure environment where they wouldn't have to worry as much about being beaten or killed by some lunatic that comes in.
Yeah, and then plus, I mean, it makes busting illegal prostitution so much easier too, because there's less of it, which is the other thing that Jamie was telling me too. Right now, illegal prostitution is such a mess, and there's so much of it that to try and deal with the problem on a case-by-case basis, it's not possible. So I always thought that was interesting. So and so it's interesting. So you and I are both cultural libertarians, and yet social conservatives at the same time. So
well, I think the major thing in terms of my social conservatism, and I wouldn't even call it social conservatism, I would just call it conservatism, because I don't think I've ever met a conservative who would contest the idea that the American family is the bedrock of our society, and that the left, in particular the feminazis, are trying to destroy that traditional family unit, and that when you destroy that traditional family unit, everything falls apart. I don't think I've ever met a conservative who would challenge that, and that would be a traditionally, socially conservative viewpoint, the importance on the family.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, really, yeah, I would have to agree. Even cultural libertarians who, are for, if they want to do drugs, that's fine. They're kind of like, well, I'm the only one that wants to do it, but I'm not going to force you to do it. I do think that the big L libertarians are a bit annoying, because to me, they're not even libertarians. They're more like anarchists who just want to get rid of the government.
Yeah, that is an issue I see not affecting the conservative movement as a whole. Government does have a place in society. Obviously, smaller government is preferable in every case. But I think one of the major issues we've had in the past, and I think we're slowly starting to see ourselves come out of that, but one of the major issues the movement has had within the past couple of years is that the animosity towards the government got so bad that we didn't even seem like we were interested in governing, and so people didn't want to put any trust in us whatsoever. And you couldn't really blame them, because if the candidate goes up and says, "Well, here's my answer for the government. I'm going to say that they can go and suck it." that's not somebody who voters are going to take seriously as somebody who wants to govern. Now I think we're starting to see ourselves pull back away from that, and which I think is a positive thing, and pulling back more towards traditional small government, but understanding that government does at least have a role.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, well, any more topics you would like to? Do you have any more topics you would like to bring up?
Uh, Anything I would like to bring up? That is good. Uh, I can't think of any issues, off the top of my head right now that I'd like to discuss. Perhaps I'm sure you've discussed American Watchmen with your listeners before.
Yeah,
Uh,
I have, but feel free to kind of give your spiel on American Watchmen, and what you think the organization is like, and what you feel like your role is there. So
well, I guess I'll say the same thing I say to everybody at the start of our interviews when we're hiring new people, and that is that. Pardon?
we're going to try and plug, we're going to try and get some listeners to maybe apply here too. I think maybe.
Oh, I think we'd love that if some of the listeners would apply, and if they do, then they're going to end up hearing this spiel. Well, I don't want to discourage them from applying, but odds are they'll hear me explain this again, unless they come into the interview and say, no, I listened to you on the Whitfield analysis. I don't need to hear all this again. But American Watchmen was founded after we left Red Millennial over our disagreement with their decision to go Never Trump and try and purge everybody. And what we were really bothered by was the second category of Never Trumpers I spoke about earlier, who went down the road of complete and utter totalitarianism, and thinking that they need to purge or get rid of everybody who disagrees with them. And that flies in the face of Jeffersonian principles, because it was Thomas Jefferson who said, well, look, I'm never going to get rid of a friend or colleague just because, we have a petty political disagreement. And so we founded American Watchmen on the Jeffersonian principle that, over petty disagreements like who the presidential nominee is aren't things that we should really be tearing ourselves apart over as a movement. And we wanted a news publication, an outlet, that anybody who's on the political right of center could come and express their voice and let their voice be heard on. And not only that, but one that could have intellectual debate where, even though, they might have disagreements, but nobody's going to call for somebody to be purged. They can, if two of our contributors have a disagreement, they can, have a little debate back and forth on it, so long as, it remains civil. And, that was really why we chose to found American Watchmen, to give young conservatives, anybody on the right wing, really, a place to express their opinion without fear of censorship like one might find at Red Millennial, despite the fact that they claim that there is no censorship at their website in their About section, although I think they ought to censor that from there instead, maybe, perhaps. That we're pretty much, as long as you're respectful, and as long as you don't think that anybody should be purged from the conservative movement because they have a petty disagreement with you, as long as you're politically right of center, then anybody is welcome at American Watchmen. So that was our founding principle, I would say, unless you have anything you think I might have left out, Sam.
I don't. I would have to say not. Surprisingly, and I won't announce the specific numbers, but surprisingly, for a website that just launched in July, and folks, I'm being serious. That's literally why I have not put out a podcast in so long. I've been busy trying to start American Watchmen and get it off the ground. But for a new website, we have taken off like nobody's business. We're getting views every day, which I didn't even expect to happen in the first place. But it's really I think it's kind of amazing how fast our audience is growing already. So
I wouldn't think it's an exaggeration to say that probably the fastest growing conservative news publication on the web right now. I don't think.
well, maybe not for the entire conservative movement, but for the millennial conservative movement, I would certainly say yes.
Yes,
So,
yes, the conservative millennial news media. That's what I should have said.
right, but I would also say that our in terms of hiring, we're not limited only to millennials. Conservatives of all ages can apply if they choose. Um,
On that note, I would like to mention you asked what I felt my role there was. Aside from being a co-founder, editor and personnel manager. We all the five founders, four other founders, including three other founders, if you exclude Sam and myself. And each of us can edit articles on there. Although we do have one person who is responsible for editorial policy, just like I'm our personnel manager, and I handle our hiring and firing policies. Although I think I don't envision us ever having to fire anybody soon. We've got a pretty good team so far. I think we're all very satisfied with them.
yeah, hopefully not.
That's all I had to say on my role. I didn't have any further comments.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, you're pretty much our personnel manager. You're the HR director. So, and it's also kind of funny to me how some people think that we're already a formal organization. Cassie Wheeler, one of our contributors, I think she was a bit intimidated at first because she thought that she was getting hired for an actual job, which I thought was kind of humorous.
Yeah,
So,
I've noticed that in the last couple interviews we've had, and they've. It's actually I take it as a compliment because that shows how professional we've appeared, and how much work we've put into the site, into the content on there, and when we were interviewing another gentleman right before the podcast tonight here. And he came in. I complimented him on his suit, as I would, of course. And he was telling me it was his very first interview. His first. He was a younger applicant. He was a teenager, and that was, I guess, we were his very first interview ever. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
oh wow, yeah, that speaks to him too that he decided to give us that amount of respect. I didn't realize that, but wow, um, that's so interesting. Um, Speaking of some non-political stuff before we go. So, where do you get your sense of fashion from, Mr. Johnson? That's what the world really wants to know. Forget the politics. Where do you get your sense of style from?
That's the important question of the day. I think a lot of people probably think about that more than my politics, actually. And to be honest with you, my fashion sense does stem a bit from my politics, and I'll go into that a little bit. First though, where does it come from? I order a lot of my clothing. I'm fascinated by the Victorian era and the Edwardian era, the late 1880s through the 1930s and 40s. And there are other time periods that fascinate me as well. I got some 50s pieces in my wardrobe as well. But that's really what fascinates me. And I've always liked how people dress then. And so I buy a lot of my clothing from the Gentleman's Emporium. And that is they specialize in pretty much this old style clothing. So I buy a lot of waistcoats from there, ascots, cravats. I do not buy my bow ties. I buy my bow ties and my ties from the tie bar. They have some knit ties there too. Very great quality at a decent price. You can buy stylized boxes there with, for about $99 you can buy a box. And it could be like a blue or green box, and it'll have blue and green. It'll have 2 or 3 blue and green bow ties, 2 and 3 normal blue and green ties, some blue and green socks, and a pocket square. Gentleman's Gazette is where I read a lot of to get my fashion advice and knowledge, I would say. Roger Stone, who is in politics, and he's a bit of a dandy himself. He's an inspiration, although he's probably been at this game way longer than I have. So,
you actually just gave me an idea, which is that I'm serious. We should have a men's fashion section on American Watchmen.
I think I already said I was going to do a piece like that. If you'll recall, a few days ago we were talking about.
But I think we might have to do an entire section. One of the things that I mentioned too on an earlier program when I first announced that we were starting American Watchmen, we're kind of starting an online magazine, and I mean we already have a sports section, we already have an entertainment and society section. Oddly enough, my highest viewed article, even into this week, it still is my piece on Batman v Superman, which surprised me because I'm more of a political commentator. But I guess people likes my movie. I guess people like when I put on my movie critic hat. But
I wouldn't be surprised by that. A lot of people aren't, especially during a presidential election year. I think everybody's sick of politics at this point, except for us, of course. And I think that a lot of readers who otherwise probably wouldn't come to our site do come to our site for sports news or film reviews or music reviews or maybe even fashion. Not yet fashion, but down the road.
Yeah. So, I mean, and we're still updating the site every day and making awesome things happen. So, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and a pleasure to be working with you as always. So, now real quick, because I know that you like to go and still do some things tonight. Where can we find you on social media, and what's the best way to get a hold of you? And
let me grab my phone here. I've changed my Twitter handle to reflect American Watchmen, and so people and so Twitter is the social media I'm probably most active on. If you do not know me personally, my Facebook is reserved for people I know personally or for business, but Twitter is where people can get a hold of me, and that is at jjohnson_AW, and that's where you can find me on there. I do have. I don't think I really have much else. I have a Snapchat, but I reserve that mainly for people I know personally. I guess if you want to get a hold of me, you're gonna have to tweet me, and that's gonna be it. Unless you have some mutual contact or Sam or something and want to get some question to me, I'm sure he could get something to you. So.
Well, and then you also have a podcast.
That's a good point. I almost forgot about that. I like you. I have not done an episode for a while because I've been a bit busy. It's Johnson's World. Right now it's on SoundCloud. That may or may not be changing soon, depending on some new information Sam brought me tonight regarding how much content you can put up on there before they limit you.
Check, Josh. I'm just going to do this because one of my one of the companies I've been working with, they'd probably appreciate this, but upload your audio content to this website called tapewrite.com, and trust me, my my one friend from Europe who's developing that website would really appreciate it. So, and they're a lot better than SoundCloud, actually, in my opinion. And I can show them to you. But yeah, hopefully we'll be starting a podcast network here too, ladies and gentlemen, where we'll all be uploading content pretty soon. But anyway, Josh, I want to thank you for coming on the program, and unless you have anything else to say, I think we'll wrap up. So
Well, it was good to be on. I enjoyed talking with you.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed having you on as well, my friend. So, all right, folks. Well, I want to thank you for tuning in for this long episode tonight. I think we almost went around 2 hours almost, and it's been quite a spectacular time. So I want to thank all of you for tuning in for tonight's episode. You can visit my website at thesamwhitfield.com. Also check out AmericanWatchman.org, and we'll see you pretty soon in the next episode. From all of us here at NGC1 and American Watchmen, have a good night and God bless.